Right, Jeremy Vine, the BBC and vaccines. Jeremy Vine is a BBC television and radio presenter. And he's got a programme that airs between midday and 2 p.m. on BBC Radio 2. Before we hear some of that programme, you may or may not know that the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, wants new legislation to force social media companies to remove content promoting false information about vaccines. So all the stuff posted by Glaxo and by Merck that say that vaccines are safe, presumably those ads are going to be deleted and the Facebook accounts of Glaxo and Merck are going to be shut down. No, of course not. Facebook accounts and Twitter accounts and YouTube accounts of those who question the efficacy, first of all, and the safety of vaccines are going to be targeted. The Health Secretary said the government is working with internet companies to identify misleading material on vaccines, including the MMR one. They're planning on using artificial intelligence programs to help root out what they call bad science. And they're blaming the decline in the uptake rates of the MMR vaccine in many countries. Here's BBC Radio 2's Jeremy Vine. Got a little bit of stuff to play for you here. Very important, this. You know, it connects to so many other things we talk about on this programme. Free speech, freedom of thought. This is Jeremy Vine today.
But the last few years, something strange has been happening. Take-up of the MMR vaccine in the UK has dropped again.
He's very excited, isn't he?
Again. And it's similar elsewhere. Last year in Europe, cases of measles tripled. At the same time, the so-called anti-vax movement, including those who wrongly believe the MMR vaccine to be dangerous, has been exploiting social media to spread its message. And this is where the government comes in. Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, saying, right, we want to crack down on this. We want to be able to intrude on conversations we don't like on places like Facebook and just wipe them. So give us a call, 08000 288 291. Tell us if this is too much or whether actually, no, he has every right to do that.
I don't think he has every right to do that. It's interesting the way Vine phrased it. Matt Hancock wants to wipe conversations that are critical of vaccines on Facebook. Conversations. So you could genuinely be talking to your Uncle Peter or your Auntie Mary, honestly. And you could be saying, well, I read a very interesting book about vaccines, or I heard a very interesting report from a Californian doctor on the Richie Allen Show about vaccines. I'm strongly thinking of not vaccinating our newborn child when he or she is born. And what they want to do is they want to wipe that. Right? Delete that comment. Can't have that. Here's Hugh Pym. Hugh Pym is the BBC's health editor. He was on with Vine today.
And health authorities around the world, not just in the UK, are very concerned about this. Social media is a very powerful force. Information and misinformation can get mixed up, fake news, misleading claims. And as you've been saying, the uptake of the MMR vaccine has been falling in many countries in Europe. In England, it was 87.2%, down consistently over 4 years. As you said, 95% is so-called herd immunity, when a population is deemed to be safe if you get that level of vaccines. And the fact that measles cases in Europe tripled to 82,500 in just 1 year has caused real alarm bells to ring.
That's bullshit, by the way. And I've heard this said on several television and radio programmes over the last 6 months. None of them have offered any proof of this. It's just say it enough times and it enters the lexicon. Say it enough times and it enters people's consciousness. Oh, measles all over the place in Europe. And of course, there used to be a time when the presenter would say, how do you know that? Not anymore. If somebody from the World Health Organization or from the Health Ministry is saying it, it must be true, so let's not challenge it. But it isn't true. Measles is not on the rise and it hasn't broken out all over Europe. It's nonsense. More from Hugh Pym, BBC Health editor.
Ring. So Matt Hancock is saying, look, we need to do more. We need to work with social media to take this misleading content away. But There is legislation over a duty of care for social media companies to act on material linked to suicide and self-harm and terrorism. There's going to be a legislation on that. Vaccine material, anti-vaccine campaigning should be deemed to be part of that as well.
So why have the rates dropped in the rest of the EU? Because obviously the Wakefield thing is going back 20 years now, so it's not that.
Yes, the vaccination rates did drop after that and then picked up again, and it was deemed not to be an issue anymore. The theories linking the MMR jab to autism had been totally discredited and disproved.
No, they haven't.
That did go on actually in the courts for some years. It seems to be more of an international thing now with other campaigners who've been raising the issue, but it's hard to actually say there's causation here.
Might be complacency, I guess.
Complacency and some sort of correlation. And actually in a confusing world when parents are hearing so many different things coming through social media, it's very hard to for some to chart a way forward. And there is a view maybe you don't want to take heavy-handed action here. Dr. Fiona Godley, editor of the British Medical Journal, was making the point to me, you need to win hearts and minds because you've got a spectrum. Some people convinced that there's something wrong with vaccination, others who are quite happy to have their children vaccinated, but a group in the middle who are well-meaning, intelligent people who just need reassurance. And maybe the way to do it is positive campaigning on social media rather than trying to shut down one bit of the argument. It's a big debate.
Positive campaigning. It's a big debate, he said there at the end. Positive campaigning rather than shutting down those who dissent. Here's the thing that intrigues me, and maybe you've considered this yourself. Do people think, and by people I mean the ordinary folk like you and me, our neighbours, our peers, did they imagine that Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, came up with this proposal by himself or in consultation with his staff at the Ministry of Health? Do people actually think that's what goes on? You know, they meet 3-4 times a week, Matt Hancock and his staff, and they throw ideas out on the table about how to improve the health of the nation. Do people think that at one of these meetings a staffer says, you know, there's a problem on the internet with people saying vaccines are unsafe. Let's introduce legislation to ban people from saying that. And the way we do that is we encourage the social media companies to delete the accounts. Do people really think that morons like Matt Hancock come up with this stuff by themselves? Can people be that ignorant? Not stupid, remember. Stupid is wrong. There isn't an intelligence issue here. It's ignorance. Are people so ignorant that they don't know that Matt Hancock and his pals get their marching orders from the World Health Organization, which is staffed, by the way, with many men and women who have been on the boards of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world? I wonder, does it ever occur to people, Jesus, where did you come up with that one, Matt? Well, I didn't actually. I got a phone call from Sweden or wherever the headquarters of the WHO is, and they just tell me what to do. And I just do it because I'm just a puppet, that's all, a fucking puppet. I'll do whatever I'm told. Wouldn't you, if you're getting paid, £250,000 a year, and if they promised you that when you leave government that you'll get to work on all of these various boards and committees and all your children's futures will be secured and all the rest of it, wouldn't you do it? No, well, I actually wouldn't, to be honest. I wouldn't. I wouldn't tell people that things are safe when I don't know if they're safe or not. That's what Matt Hancock does. Gets his marching orders from one of the most corrupt institutions on planet Earth, the World Health Organization. There you are. Lovely. Imagine people actually think that Hancock dreams this up. Wow. Then, to my amazement, Jeremy Vine introduces a guy called David Robert Grimes, a physicist, not a doctor, nor a biologist, nor a chemist, a physicist. Now, David Robert Grimes and I have a little bit of history. There was a bit of a Twitter spat about 1.5 years ago when Grimes began accusing Irish mothers of being child abusers because those mothers were questioning vaccine safety. Grimes is about the worst of the worst and refused to come on this programme and debate me about vaccine safety and efficacy. And he laughably says to Jeremy Vine today, and this is extraordinary stuff even by David Robert Grimes standards, and this is a wretched scumbag fucking coward who trolls women on Twitter and accuses them of child abuse because they have questions about what the HPV vaccine might have done to their daughters. This wretched coward who wouldn't debate me or anybody else. So he goes on to the relative safety of the Jeremy Vine show. And listen to what he says. He says we, people basically, aren't able to discern for ourselves what is true and what isn't true because we're not as clever as the Oxford-educated David Robert Grimes. And his Oxford degree is as worthless as the fucking paper it was printed on when they gave it to him. When he posed for the picture with his girlfriend or his boyfriend and his mammy and his daddy waving in the audience. Worthless! Doesn't matter whether it's Oxford, Manchester University, Salford University, where I went, and other places. It's a regurgitation society. Come in and show us that you can regurgitate everything we fill your fucking empty head with, and then we'll give you a nice piece of paper and a 2-1 or a master's. This guy's a moron. He says here, we are not capable of deciding for ourselves that which is correct and that which isn't.
There's a lot of research that suggests that we think we're very savvy, all of us, and we think we can differentiate signal from noise quite well. Unfortunately, the data we have to date shows that people are very, very bad at ascertaining what is reliable information and what is misinformation. And for many, many years, a dedicated core of anti-vaccine activists have exploited our uncertainty about this. So there is a very good argument for saying, well, actually, if you're perpetuating misinformation that could be harmful to public health and has no factual basis whatsoever, should you be allowed to do that? And I suppose it's a more nuanced conversation than just banning things outright, but it certainly is a complicated question.
Well, I suppose it's the question of whether Facebook, for example, has the status of just an informal conversation in the pub where somebody says, oh, I don't think those things work. And for a lot of people, it does. It's just chat. It doesn't have to be factually based.
Right. Facebook is basically, most of the time, like an informal chat around the pub. Why should it be factually based conversations? Man United are the best team in the world, says the presenter of this radio programme. They're not, of course, or anything like it, sadly. What do you do? Is that misinformation? Do you stop that? Good point by Jeremy Vine. Why should Facebook be interfering in private conversations or anybody else and deleting people because somebody has decided that something incorrect or something not factual has been said? What does David Robert Grimes, dickhead, the physicist, what does he say to that?
Well, you would be right if you were just talking about people having conversations and little comments. But a lot of these groups that are pushing these anti-vaccine messages are very, very dedicated groups. They are some pages like Stop Mandatory Vaccinations, for example, are major hub centres, and they sent out memes and ideas that scare people. So the vast majority of parents that choose not to vaccinate their children are not dyed-in-the-wool anti-vaxxers. They're just frightened parents who have seen these scary things. Which kind of...
Yeah, scary things like hundreds and hundreds of teenage girls in Ireland collapsing with debilitating mystery illnesses that turn them from outgoing, healthy, athletic, up and at them young girls into bedridden. Maybe that's the scary fucking shit that people are seeing that makes them think twice about giving vaccines to their children, maybe.
Which kind of originate from these anti-vaccine hubs. And there's a very good argument that these anti-vaccine hubs themselves are doing huge damage by doing that. Now, they've been exploiting that since even back in the days of Wakefield, when the internet was in its relative infancy. That was starting to happen then. But with the advent of social media, it has become orders of magnitude easier for people that are really trying to cause harm. And you could look at it as akin to how we regulate hate speech, for example. Stuff that is, there's a division between free speech and, damaging speech. And people can have conversations and should be asking questions. But the answers to those questions matters. And the motivations of the people, purporting to have the answers matters as well.
Yeah. So, yes, the answer is yes, Jeremy. I do advocate Facebook or Instagram or Twitter intervening and deleting a conversation between two people, like a conversation you might be having in the pub, conversation where one person says, I'm a bit worried about vaccines. I think I'll be exempting my daughter, thank you. At that point, David Robert Adolf Hitler Grimes wants the institution that is the social media company to delete the conversation. Wow. That's the definition of fascism, isn't it? Then Grimes amazingly says that there's no need to fear your very young infant child getting lots of vaccines at once. You've got to hear this to believe it. Don't worry about your child getting a load of vaccines in the one go. No problem. That's all been debunked, says the Oxford-educated physicist David Robert Grimes.
There's an idea that you get an immune system overload if you get all these vaccinations at once, and that...
Where did that come from?
Is debunked. Any immunologist will tell you that is just not...
Hang on a second. Let's hear this again.
There's an idea that you get an immune system overload if you get all these vaccinations at once, and that is debunked. Any immunologist will tell you that is just not true. Now, freedom of speech is a really loaded term here, because it depends if we're talking about what we're encountering on social media versus these things. But these are myths, so people have the right to believe them. But whether they should be catered to and allowed indulged in them, I'm not sure that's really...
Yeah, I mean, I suppose they're saying...
We're talking about thought crime here. People can believe them, but whether they should be catered to or indulge, I'm not sure that's a good idea. This is thought crime. Grimes is putting forward an argument for the invasion of a sovereign human being and his or her right to say, no, I will not be injected with a toxic tidal wave of fucking shit that could destroy me or destroy my child. Especially as you wanted to inoculate me against something which is not the end of the world if I get like the flu or the measles. So I'll say no thank you very much, but thanks for the interest in my health and in my well-being. What Grimes wants is to remove your sovereign right as a sentient, completely individual, free person to say, no, I'm not having it, thanks.
They're seeing it as the same as somebody says, E.T. was the best film, and someone else says, no, it was Jaws. And they're seeing it as a genuine disagreement of view. But you see it as facts versus lies.
I do, and I also see it as something that's fundamentally quite selfish, because...
It's selfish now to exempt yourself from vaccination or your child. It's very selfish.
Vaccination isn't just for you and me and the people who choose to get vaccinated. We have diseases like measles that have an R0 or like an infection rate of 12 to 18, which means that every person that gets measles, 12 to 18 other people will get it from that person. So
bullshit.
So it's incredibly virulent. And the reason we have these ideas like herd immunity is you're trying to protect people who can't be vaccinated. Very small children or people going through chemotherapy who are immunocompromised, society as a whole. So when people say, oh, this is my freedom of speech, it's my choice, well, that's kind of true. But if you...
Kind of true?
But if you suddenly give a pregnant woman rubella and her fetus comes out deformed,
you're a murderer!
Whose responsibility is that? So you can take it an extreme libertarian slant on it, but in reality, you got to look at the fact that we're all part of society, and it matters cohesively as a whole what we do.
No room for the individual. Your rights, your sovereign right to refuse your body to be stuck with that toxic tidal wave I mentioned, doesn't matter. If we make up some bullshit that you are a danger to everyone else for not being vaccinated, you've got to do what you're told. And you heard that first bit, didn't you? That bit about lots of vaccines at once not being dangerous. You did hear that, right?
There's an idea that you get an immune system overload if you get all these vaccinations at once. And that is debunked. Any immunologist will tell you that is just not true.
Back in 2015, I was introduced to a New York woman called Alyssa Nethery. Amazing woman. Whose baby whose baby boy Bentley died 5 days after he was vaccinated. 13 times. Do you remember this? Alyssa Nethery, speaking exclusively to the Richie Allen Show back in early 2015.
My son Bentley was almost 6 months old. I had held off on having him vaccinated. I guess you can say I just didn't have a very good feeling about it. I held off until he was 6 months old. I had read somewhere that the SIDS rate for boys lowers at that age, which is sudden infant death, so the rate was supposedly lower. So I just held off until then to have him vaccinated, and I took him in, and the doctor had instructed me that we were only going to do his 2-month doses, and then after that, get him caught up. Well, what the doctor didn't tell me was that he was going to go ahead and add an extra dose of the DTaP, which he was already getting one, which is a 3-in-1, and then so he added an extra dosing onto that, so that puts 6 doses right there. And then he had informed me that Bentley hadn't had any of his oral rotavirus vaccines, so he told me that he would only be having one since at 6 months was the last time that you were to get the doses for that. What he didn't tell me was that he was going to give him all 3 doses. I later found this out when I went up to the doctor's office to get the medical record from that day. He did give him the other shots as well that go along with the 2-month doses, but he doubled and tripled on some of them, which 13 altogether is just entirely way too many. I mean, I think 1 is too many, but they've never studied the safety of what the combined doses will do when you give multiple shots together. So, I think it's just dangerous all in all. But my son lived for 5 days after the vaccines. Throughout that time, after the vaccines were given, we were sent straight home. Usually the nurse will keep you in the office for about 15 minutes after receiving any medicine or vaccinations, which they didn't with us. They just let us go. By the time I got my son home, which was probably about 20 minutes after he received his vaccines, I noticed a really large red knot on his leg from where he had the first batch of the DTaP. Well, it was mixed together in the syringe, but it was a very large amount of vaccine in the syringe, and I guess that's from what the red knot was on his leg, which is automatically an adverse reaction. But I didn't know. They didn't send me home with any paperwork or anything, so I had nothing really to refer back to. He was cranky, which babies do get cranky after vaccinations, but I thought it was just typical. Throughout the 5 days, I started noticing he would twitch some. I didn't know that it was a seizure because baby seizures and adult or older child seizures, it's different. He began to be kind of limp on one side, and this was all within 5 days. Then the last day, the day he passed away, which was April 10th, he seemingly started feeling a little bit better. And then around noontime, my daughter laid down for a nap. He has an older sister. And we haven't vaccinated her since she was 1 year old, and she's actually been extremely healthy. But she laid down for a nap, and my son started to get tired, so I just held him on my chest like I did all the time, and he fell asleep, and he just never woke up. And, it was very chaotic after that. It was awful. His cause of death was ruled as SUDS, not SIDS. It's sudden, unexpected death syndrome, and nothing to do with the vaccines was ever brought up. They would never admit it, to begin with. So, pretty much just left, stuck with no answers, and I'm currently in the process of trying to gather enough funds together right now to find an attorney who would be able to assist me with, I believe medical
negligence. It's a fight that still goes on today for Alyssa Nethery. They said SUDS, sudden unexplained death syndrome. And while they acknowledged that the boy was given 13 inoculations in one day, right, they incredibly decided to say that there was no correlation between the 5 days, the deterioration of the boy's condition, and his health to the point where he died. No correlation between that, those 13 vaccines, and his death. And David Robert Grimes will tell you there's no evidence that overloading a baby with vaccines is dangerous. Well, that could be the exception, Richie. Well, in fact, it isn't, because I could have dug out another half a dozen women who've come on this programme to talk about their children becoming seriously and grievously ill after receiving multiple vaccinations in one day. David Robert Grimes either doesn't know that information, and to give him his due, gotta be honest, he might not. If he does, well, then he's a stone cold liar when he says that there isn't any evidence that overloading a child with those vaccines could be very dangerous. It's beyond dangerous. And then this guy Grimes tells Jeremy Vine, now this guy's a physicist allegedly, not a doctor, not a virologist, not a paediatrician, not a biologist, not a chemist. He brings up the HPV vaccine, which is the human papillomavirus vaccine, which is beyond controversial in Ireland and elsewhere. Do you think Jeremy Vine does his job? Do you think when Grimes brings up HPV that Jeremy Vine says, well, hang on a second, weren't you embroiled in some controversy in Ireland when women were saying the vaccine harmed their daughters and you were calling them child abusers, David Robert Grimes? Do you think he does his job, Jeremy Vine? Have a listen. Yeah, we should be hearing that clip now. Give me a second there, I'll bring it up for you now. So this is where Grimes brings up the HPV vaccine.
We look at other things, like we have the HPV vaccine, which prevents, cancers. It prevents genital cancers. And we don't look at that in context. It's not about, these potential for minute chances of harm.
Minute chances of harm. Hundreds, maybe more than 1,000 Irish teenagers. Immune systems destroyed by exposure to Gardasil. Left with debilitating mystery illnesses that make them bedridden and wheelchair bound in many cases. In some cases, let's be honest. Minute problems, says Grimes. And at this point, Vine should be jumping in and saying, hold on there a second now, let's bring a bit of balance to this. What about regret.ie? What about that controversy? But Jeremy Vine, well,
it's really about what does vaccination prevent us against? What is, if we balance up the probability of protection versus damage, vaccines score tremendously positively for helping us.
This guy is not a virologist, not an immunologist, not a biologist, not a chemist, not a paediatrician. This guy describes himself as a physicist. And yet again, Vine hasn't reminded the audience that this guy is not an expert. Not an expert. He's a campaigner. That's all he is. He's an activist for vaccines. Not an expert, and has no right to be approved by Jeremy Vine in his programme as an expert in the field of immunology or vaccine safety. And yet he drones on, and Vine doesn't stop him. But Vine does stop him here and drops a proper bombshell. Listen to this by Jeremy Vine.
I'll just tell you something that Hugh Pym...
An amazing story that just came across the BBC News desk today.
Just found out as he was leaving the studio, and the BBC health editor very kindly passed it on to us. You may not have seen this yet, David, which is from New York State and Rockland County in New York.
So Rockland County in New York have made a law about vaccines. Wait till you hear this.
New York State is declaring a state of emergency in response...
A state of emergency now in Rockland County in New York State. They've declared a state of emergency. Why?
Response to a severe outbreak of measles, and it starts at midnight on Wednesday, March 27th, so tomorrow. And from midnight tomorrow, anybody who's under 18 and hasn't had the measles vaccine is going to be barred from all public places.
What did he just say there? He couldn't have said that.
Tomorrow, anybody who's under 18 and hasn't had the measles vaccine is going to be barred from all public places.
What are you doing out, boy? I'm just going to the store. You been vaccinated, boy? No. Get your fucking self home then, boy. It's all come true, hasn't it? Hasn't it? every dystopian film, every fucking book that said the world would end up like this. It's arrived. Rockland County in New York. If you're under 18 and you haven't been vaccinated, you're banned from public places. It's a tyranny. What does David Robert Grimes think of that? Surely that's a step too far, even for the physicist David Robert Grimes, surely.
What do you think about that?
I think that's a good idea. I mean, this goes back to the social contract.
Oh.
Choose not to get vaccinated, but you shouldn't be able to harm other people because of that. So if you don't want to play by that kind of level of social contract, I should point out that America had mandatory vaccinations for years, but they've seen an increase in religious and political exemptions. And in those kind of centres is where you're seeing these massive outbreaks. New York has hit its 21-year high. So it is an epidemic. It's an incredibly virulent disease, and we cannot be complacent about it.
David Robert Grimes. And know nothing, masqueraded by the BBC as an expert in immunology and in vaccine efficacy and safety, when he's a physicist allegedly. I say allegedly because I don't know if he practices physics, if physics and his knowledge of it makes up his daily life, if he works in some field of engineering or physics or whatever. Not a doctor, not a paediatrician, not a virologist, not an immunologist, not a biologist, but rolled out by the BBC and RTE, Radio Telefíséireann in Ireland, as somebody who is an expert in this field, even though he isn't. And because, I'm getting tweeted now. And I know people are absolutely scratching their heads. People are scratching their heads. That can't be right, Richie. That cannot be right, that. What you just heard there, that under 18s are banned effectively from leaving the house in Rockwell County in New York. It can't be true. You know, it can't be. Tom, did you hear that, Tom?
No. Could you repeat it? Because I can't believe my fucking ears.
Let's repeat it. This is what Jeremy Vine said.
Which is from New York State, and Rockland County in New York State is declaring a state of emergency in response to a severe outbreak of measles, and it starts at midnight on Wednesday, March 27th, so tomorrow, and from midnight tomorrow, anybody who's under 18 and hasn't had the measles vaccine is going to be barred from all public places. What do you think about that?
I think that's a good idea. I mean, this goes back to the social contract. You can choose not to get vaccinated, but you shouldn't be able to harm other people because...
Yeah, David Robert Grimes there. World-class fuckwit on the Richie Allen Show for Tuesday, March 26, 2019. Let's lock everybody up who doesn't do what the government tells them to do. Lock them all fucking up and throw away the key. This is Joy Division, back with more in 2 minutes.